There's a hidden pattern in the global economy. Most people never see it. They are busy watching the noise. But this pattern is precise. It is unforgiving. It predicted every single major financial crash for 200 years. Everyone. Your financial advisor doesn't know this pattern. Why? Because it exposes the flaws in the system they work for. Your professor never taught it. They prefer linear, comfortable narratives. The news media will call the crash a black swan when it hits. They always call predictable events a surprise. But this cycle predicted 1873. It accurately predicted the Great Depression. It warned us clearly before the 2008 global financial crisis. And right now, this exact same refined cycle is pointing its cold mathematical finger directly at 2026. This isn't about fear-mongering. It's about math. It's about certainty. It's about the deep, unchanging rhythms of debt and human psychology. The evidence is clear. The clock is short. The choice is yours. Prepare now, with knowledge, or wait until the whole system breaks. Welcome to Code of Collapse. Our story starts with a brilliant but tragic figure, Nikolai Kondratiev, an economist in the 1920s working in Soviet Russia. He found the great heresy of capitalism. While his peers were celebrating a permanent boom, he looked deeper. He didn't look at last week's news. He studied 150 years of raw data, price indices, interest rates, capital flows. What he saw was shocking. He saw that growth isn't straight up. It's a long, predictable, oscillating wave, a supercycle lasting consistently between 40 to 60 years. He divided the cycle into the 4 seasons: spring, recovery; summer, prosperity; autumn, stagnation, peak; and winter, collapse and purge. His discovery was political dynamite. He said that even capitalist countries crash by design. This threatened the Soviet claim of perpetual prosperity. In 1930, Stalin had him arrested. He was sent to the gulags and was executed a few years later. They tried to erase his work, they burned his books. But the mathematical cycle lived on. It has been proven right by every single global crisis since 1938. The cycle is more resilient than the dictators who try to deny it. Mapping the last 50-year wave, the IT cycle, detailed phase breakdown. We are finishing the 5th cycle now. This is the information technology cycle. It was built on the microchip, the personal computer, and the internet. It started around 1970, meaning it is now over 50 years old and reaching its fatal conclusion. Let's look at its journey because we are living in its final month. The spring phase, the 1980s. This was the recovery. We were fixing the chaos and high inflation of the 1970s. The debt accumulated in the last winter was paid off or inflated away. Debt was low and manageable. Innovation was key. The personal computer, Microsoft, the start of financial deregulation. Capital was scarce and thus highly valuable and efficiently used. This was genuine, hard-earned growth, not debt-fueled euphoria. Institutions rebuilt trust after the high inflation era. The summer phase, the 1990s, the boom hit, the internet exploded, connecting the world. The Cold War ended. Globalization meant access to cheap labor and cheap goods, suppressing inflation and making prosperity feel easy. Everyone felt rich. Employment was high, wages grew modestly, and asset prices began to climb. But here is the fatal error of summer. We confuse temporary prosperity with permanence. Banks, corporations, and average consumers start piling on risk. They stop fearing debt. Central banks ignore early inflation warnings because the globalization effect masks the true cost of money. The seeds of the next crisis are planted through leverage. The autumn phase, late 1990s, 2008. The peak and the denial. The party first soured with the 2000 dot-com bubble. But instead of letting the debt be purged, it was simply shifted, not destroyed, into the housing market via complex financial instruments. Speculation went absolutely insane. This phase is characterized by stagflation, slow real growth combined with high asset price inflation, meaning your house price goes up, but your wage stagnates. Debt accumulation accelerates to fever pitch, becoming completely unsustainable. Central banks belatedly tried to cool things down, raised rates slightly, and pop, they burst the housing bubble. This brought us to 2008. The system was too fragile, too interconnected, and too indebted to handle even a minor correction. The winter phase, 2008, present, delayed. The great mistake. The 2008 crisis should have been the full, brutal Kondratiev winter. It should have been a complete cleansing of bad debt, liquidation of over-leveraged capital, and the destruction of non-viable businesses. But governments and central banks intervened. They were paralyzed by fear of a 1930s-style outcome. They used unprecedented measures, zero interest rates, ZIRP, for over a decade. They printed trillions of dollars via quantitative easing, QE. They bailed out the very institutions that caused the crisis. This intervention was the great mistake. They did not cancel the winter, they delayed it. by preventing the natural necessary liquidation of bad debt and saving the zombie companies. Firms surviving only on cheap credit, they forced the entire global system to run on artificial life support for 15 years. They guaranteed that the underlying debt and imbalances became exponentially larger. The coming collapse will be proportionally more catastrophic because the problem was compounded, not solved. The result is the everything bubble. Every major asset, stocks, bonds, real estate, even collectibles, is inflated by cheap money simultaneously. When the crash comes, unlike 2008, where bonds were safe, this time there will be nowhere to hide. Every category will reset together. We can pinpoint the 2026 crash window, specifically 2022 to 2027, because three massive, independent, and powerful historical cycles are all converging right now. When these cycles align, the resulting crisis is not just a downturn, it is a systemic reinitialization. Kondratiev Wave, 50-60 years. The underlying technological cycle is exhausted. The IT cycle peaked in efficiency. Adding the 50-60 year cycle length from the 1970s start means the final exhaustion period lands squarely in the 2020-2030 decade. Capital is chasing marginal high-risk returns, AI, space, crypto, because the reliable returns of the old cycle are gone. Debt supercycle, 70-80 years. This cycle measures the point of maximum debt saturation. The last time the global financial system was this leveraged was the Great Depression era, 1930s. Adding 70-80 years, we hit the 2010s. The system has been living past its mathematical limit for over a decade. We are in a structural debt trap where new debt is essential merely to sustain economic stability, not expansion. Generational cycle, 80-90 years. This is the forgetting cycle, the dangerous cycle of complacency. No one who controls significant financial or political power today remembers the real 1930s depression. This lack of memory leads to catastrophic complacency. We repeat the exact same mistakes. Excessive speculation, treating risk as optional, and believing that market cycles are dead. Adding 80-90 years to the last major crisis peak, 1929 to 1933, lands us squarely in the 2019-2023 window, confirming the psychological system is ready for the fall. The convergence is the warning. It is the alignment of technology, finance, and psychology all screaming the same end date. The financial impossibility, debt's breaking point, deep dive. The convergence is amplified by the sheer volume of global debt, which now exceeds $370 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's approximately 340% of the world's gross domestic product. At the peak of the Great Depression, the US debt to GDP ratio was significantly lower. The cornerstone of the global system, US federal debt, is over $36 trillion and rising relentlessly. Crucially, the annual interest payments on this debt now exceed $1.2 trillion annually. This figure is already larger than the defense budget and Medicare. At current interest rates, the new reality of 5% plus, this interest burden is mathematically impossible to sustain. It starves the government of resources and creates a spiraling interest-on-interest death loop. The only two structural escapes are outright default or massive monetary debasement, inflation. Both mean disaster for the current financial structure. This massive debt fuels the zombie corporations problem. A significant portion of the $11 trillion in corporate debt is held by these non-viable firms. Their survival relies entirely on the Federal Reserve maintaining low interest rates. Now that rates are high, their bond maturities are becoming impossible to refinance. Their failure will not be isolated. It triggers a domino effect that starts with high-yield bond defaults, spreads to high-risk loan segments, and then cascades through the broader economy as mass layoffs begin. These zombies are an essential part of the current employment picture. Their failure is systemic failure. Trigger 1, the yield curve inversion law, the uninversion signal. This is not a theory. This is the single most accurate recession predictor in modern financial history. The bond market always knows what the stock market is ignoring. The law. Every single recession since 1950 has been preceded by a yield curve inversion, specifically the 10-year minus the 3-month yield. There have been no false positives. The inversion occurs when short-term rates exceed long-term rates. This signals to bond investors that the Fed's short-term tightening is so severe, it guarantees a future economic contraction. The data. The curve inverted deeply in July 2022. It remained inverted for an extended period, the longest in modern history, indicating deep, persistent systemic stress. Crucially, it finally uninverted in late 2024. This uninversion is the real danger signal. It happens when long-term rates fall rapidly as large institutional investors panic and rush into the perceived safety of long-term government bonds, driving yields down. This is the bond market screaming, recession is here. The clock. Historically, the crash begins with a delay of precisely 6 to 18 months after the curve uninverts. Late 2024 plus 6 to 18 months means mid-2025 to late 2026. That is the precise window for the economic contraction to become a financial crisis. This is not a guess, it is following the mechanical lag of a 70-year indicator. Trigger 2. The commercial real estate cliff. The banking system break. This is the most specific, mechanical, and visible trigger. It threatens the regional banking sector, the heart of small business financing, and the core stability of the US financial system. The problem over 1.5 trillion in commercial real estate, CRE loans, are set to mature and need refinancing by the end of 2026. This debt is not spread out. It is a giant refinancing wall that peaks dramatically in the first half of 2026. The trap. These loans were originated when interest rates were ultra low, 2 to 4%. They are being refinanced now at 7 to 9%. Simultaneously, property valuations, especially for office space, impacted by permanent shifts to remote work, have plummeted by 30-50% in many cities. The operating income can no longer service the drastically higher debt payments. Defaults are inevitable and non-negotiable. The debt must be marked down. The cascade. Regional banks hold the vast majority of this debt. When they are forced to write down billions in loan values, their balance sheets collapse. When regional banks fail, the credit market freezes. That contagion spreads rapidly, cutting off lending to healthy businesses, killing job creation, and triggering a broader economic collapse on Main Street. This event is not a recessionary catalyst, it is the systemic crack that starts the true financial panic. Trigger 3 and 4, corporate failure and money velocity, the economic slowdown. Trigger 3, corporate credit pressure. The high-yield bond market, where risky corporations borrow, is flashing bright red. Investors are demanding increasingly higher premiums, wider credit spreads, for taking on this risky corporate debt. This signals an expectation of mass defaults. This widening trend in spreads historically precedes the crisis by 12 to 24 months, placing the peak default wave in late 2025 to 2026. Companies that rely on continuous refinancing rather than stable cash flow will hit a sudden wall of insolvency. The surge in corporate bankruptcies we are seeing now is merely the opening act. The climax is yet to come. Trigger 4. The velocity of money. This indicator measures the speed at which money changes hands and is a direct gauge of economic anxiety and confidence. Before every major recession, money velocity peaks and declines as people hoard cash and businesses halt spending. A declining velocity means the same amount of money is generating less economic activity, causing a contraction. The current declining trend in money velocity has been steep since the peak in early 2022, and the historical lag suggests the recessionary forces have been active since early 2024. This confirms that the slowdown is already baked into the system and is merely waiting for the final mechanical trigger to initiate the panic. The synthesis of these four mechanical indicators, the yield curve, CRE maturities, credit spreads, and money velocity, locks the crisis window firmly onto the first half of 2026. The Federal Reserve is not a genius market manager. They are trapped. They are facing an impossible trilemma. They cannot sustain high rates without crashing the debt-laden economy, forcing the delayed winter. But they cannot lower rates without immediately reigniting the massive inflationary fire that they claim to have defeated. The choice based on historical precedent, the Kondratiev playbook, is clear. They will always choose to delay pain via the printing press. They will prioritize asset prices over currency stability. Expect a rate cut in late 2024 or early 2025. This will not be a sign of true recovery. This will be the bull trap, a final dangerous liquidity-fueled rally, the last bubble before the 2026 burst. This maneuver is designed to lure the last remaining optimistic capital into the market just before the collapse. The ultimate solution to the $36 trillion debt problem will be to inflate the debt away, which means the destruction of the purchasing power of the currency through perpetual high inflation. They will sacrifice the dollar to save the debt structure. The cycles don't come to destroy your future. They come to reset the system and violently redistribute wealth. Kondratiev winters are the moments when generational wealth is created by those who are prepared, and wealth is destroyed for those who are unprepared. The biggest challenge is purely psychological. The crash is not an event. It is a brutal, extended process. It will be painful. When your portfolio is down 50%, when the media is screaming that capitalism is over, when every expert tells you to sell everything and hide, this is precisely when you must be buying. The cycles demand that you act entirely contrary to your deepest, most primal financial emotions, fear and panic. You must internalize the certainty of the cycle before the panic hits, or you will fail the test. And sell at the exact bottom, handing your future wealth to those who waited patiently. This is the market's great transfer of wealth driven by human emotion. Surviving the winter and capitalizing on the subsequent spring requires shedding risk and accumulating liquidity. Your goal is flexibility and resilience. 1. Debt liquidation. Pay off all high-interest consumer debt, credit cards, auto loans, personal loans. Debt is an anchor in a crisis. When unemployment spikes and credit tightens, debt payments become impossible. Being debt-free gives you the flexibility to survive unemployment, wait out the storm, and deploy capital when assets are cheap. Focus on maximizing your monthly cash flow. 2. Cash reserves and liquidity. Reduce your equity exposure dramatically. Your capital needs to be safe. Build a large liquidity position, ideally 12 to 24 months of expenses, plus dedicated opportunity capital. This cash is not merely savings, it is ammunition for the crisis. It must be held in the safest, most liquid form possible, ready to be deployed when asset prices fall 70% or more. Liquidity is the single most valuable commodity in a deflationary crash. 3. Crisis assets. You need assets immune to fiat collapse and that maintain value through hyperinflation deflation cycles. This means physical gold, silver, and productive farmland. These assets do not rely on the solvency of any bank or government. They have historically been the ultimate insurance policy during systemic resets. They maintain their purchasing power when paper assets are collapsing. The cycle is turning. The code that predicted 1929 and 2008 points directly and unequivocally to 2026. The time to prepare is now. Will you prepare with knowledge, or will you hope the cycles are wrong this time? The market is unforgiving to hope. Don't be a victim. Subscribe to Code of Collapse right now to master the cycles. Click the bell because the very next video will detail the specific investment sectors that will collapse first, the names of the banks and companies most exposed, and exactly where you must deploy your capital to create generational wealth. The winter is coming, but the next spring belongs to the prepared.